No one suspected that a quiet, grey-haired widow living in the dusty attic of her son's mansion could vanish overnight. Even fewer imagined I could single-handedly dismantle the empire my ungrateful son thought made him untouchable. He believed I was nothing more than a helpless burden. He did not know I had been preparing for this exact moment for 20 years. The vast fortune he and his greedy wife claimed as their own had never actually belonged to them. My name is Marjorie Hale. To the social elite dining at the Vanderbilt in Newport, Rhode Island, I am merely a footnote in my son's biography. They see a woman in her 60s with hair the colour of steel wool and a dress that went out of fashion a decade ago. They see a silent, grey figure occupying space at the head of the table. They have conveniently forgotten that I was the one who built Hale Logistics from a single rusted truck into a global shipping empire. They have forgotten that I sat in the chairman's seat for 30 years before I quietly retired to the background. They mistake my silence for senility. The restaurant was suffocatingly opulent. Crystal chandeliers vibrated with the hum of polite conversation, and the air smelled of truffles and expensive champagne. We were there to celebrate my granddaughter's 7th birthday. She sat surrounded by piles of gifts wrapped in gold and silver paper tablets, designer clothes, and toys that cost more than most families spend on groceries in a month. I sat at the far end of the table, my hands resting on a small, plain white envelope. When the time came for gifts, I waited until the noise died down. With a steady hand, I passed the envelope across the linen tablecloth. Graham, my son and the current CEO of the company I built, snatched it up before his daughter could reach it. He had the arrogant, flushed look of a man who had consumed 3 scotches too many. He tore the seal open with unnecessary force and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It was a Series EE savings bond. "What is this?" Graham asked, his voice booming across the hush of the dining room. He held the paper up by a corner as if it were contaminated. "It is a savings bond," I said softly. "I bought it for $100 the day she was born. It matures over time. It is meant to teach patience." Graham stared at me, his mouth twisting into a cruel sneer. Then he laughed. It was a barking, ugly sound that made the guests at the neighbouring tables turn and stare. $100, Graham shouted, slapping the bond onto the table. "Mum, are you— Act your age, for God's sake. Do you have any idea what year this is? $100 does not even cover the tip for the valet. This is insulting." Lucinda, my daughter-in-law, placed a hand on his shoulder. Her fingers were decked in diamonds that I knew the company accounts had paid for. She looked at me with a pity that felt sharper than a knife. "Oh, Graham, stop it," she said, though her eyes danced with amusement. "Don't be so hard on her. You know your mother isn't quite all there anymore. She probably thinks $100 is still a fortune. It is sweet, really, in a sad sort of way." She looked around the table at the board members and friends they had invited. She forgets things. We just have to be patient with the elderly. Right. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter went through the group. They looked at me with sympathetic grimaces, shaking their heads. To them, I was just the crazy old woman living in the attic, the burden Graham and Lucinda had to carry. I saw the dismissal in their eyes. They thought I was a relic. They thought my mind was as grey and faded as my hair. I looked at Graham. He was my flesh and blood. But in that moment, I saw only a stranger consumed by greed. He pushed the bond away until it fell onto the floor, discarded like trash. Next time, Mother, Graham sneered, pouring himself another drink. Just sign a card. It is less embarrassing for everyone. I did not pick up the bond. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that cut through their laughter. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. I looked at my granddaughter one last time, sending her a silent apology, and then I turned toward the exit. "Where are you going?" Lucinda called out, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Marjorie? Sit down. Don't make a scene." I kept walking. I walked past the staring guests, past the maître d', and out into the cool night air. My heart was not pounding with grief. It was beating with the steady, cold rhythm of a judge delivering a verdict. They thought I was walking away in shame. They were wrong. I was not weak. I was merely recording every single word they said, filing every insult into the archive of my memory. They had just signed their own sentences, and they did not even know the trial had begun. The heat in the attic was oppressive. Lucinda liked to call this space the guest suite, but anyone with eyes could see it was a glorified storage closet. Stacks of old magazines and broken furniture crowded the small room, leaving me just enough space for a narrow twin bed and a scratched nightstand. The air conditioning vents had been conveniently taped over, making the room feel like a sauna even at night. I sat on the edge of the mattress and listened to the heavy footsteps thundering up the stairs. The door flew open without a knock. Graham stood in the doorway, his face still flushed from the alcohol he had consumed at dinner. He did not look like the little boy I had raised. He looked like a bloated, angry stranger in an expensive suit. "Give me the keys," Graham demanded, extending a hand that trembled slightly with rage. I did not argue. I reached into my purse and pulled out the key fob to my 10-year-old sedan. He snatched it from my palms so hard his fingernails scratched my skin. "You are done driving," he spat, shoving the keys into his pocket. "After that stunt you pulled at the restaurant, you are obviously not capable of making rational decisions. You are grounded. You do not leave this property unless Lucinda or I say so." He paced the small room, kicking a stack of old books out of his way. "And do not think you are getting your allowance this month," he continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "That $500 is obviously being wasted on senile nonsense like savings bonds. From now on, you get zero. We will buy your groceries. We will buy your medicine. You will be completely dependent on us until you learn some respect." I looked at him. I really looked at him. For years, I had made excuses for his behavior. I had blamed the stress of the business or the influence of his wife. But standing there, watching him gloat over cutting off a pittance of an allowance to his own mother, I realized the rot had reached the core. There was no Graham left. There was only greed wearing his face. "Is that all?" I asked quietly. "That is all." Graham sneered. "Get some sleep. Try not to embarrass us in your dreams." He slammed the door, and I heard the distinct click of the lock from the outside. He had locked me in. I waited until his footsteps faded down the hall. Then, the mask of the frail old woman dropped. I stood up and walked to the door, pressing my ear against the wood to ensure he was truly gone. Silence. I returned to the bed and sat down, but this time I picked up my left shoe. It was a black leather pump, a relic from my days in the boardroom. I gripped the heel and twisted it hard to the right. With a soft click, the heel cap detached, revealing a hollowed-out compartment. Inside sat a tiny, black memory card. They thought the money was theirs. Graham believed that when I stepped down, I had handed over the empire. He believed the documents he signed gave him total ownership. He was wrong. Every single asset, every property, and every bank account was held within the Hale family trust. Graham was merely the acting trustee. I was the grantor. And the bylaws I had written 20 years ago, which Graham had never bothered to read in full, gave me the power of absolute revocation. I could revoke the trust at any time for any reason. I went to the back of the cluttered closet and pulled out a heavy, dusty box labelled winter blankets. Underneath the moth-eaten wool lay a matte black laptop case. It was military grade, encrypted, and completely separate from the house network. I opened the laptop and inserted the memory card. The screen glowed blue, illuminating the dark attic. I typed in a 64-character password that I had memorized decades ago. The screen flashed, access granted, administrator privileges active. I saw the numbers. The balances were astronomical, but Graham had been bleeding the company dry to fund his lifestyle. It stopped tonight. I pulled a burner phone from the same box and dialed a number I had not called in 5 years. "Arthur," I said when the line connected. "Marjorie." The voice on the other end was rough with sleep, but instantly alert. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said, my voice steady and cold. "It is time. Execute the Phoenix Protocol." "Are you sure?" Arthur asked. "Once we start this, there is no going back. It will scorch the earth." "I know," I replied, looking at the locked door. "Burn it down. Arthur, burn it all down." "The commands are cued," Arthur said, his voice coming through the speaker of my burner phone with the sharp precision of a sniper taking aim. "I am hitting the personal accounts first, checking, savings, and the investment portfolios attached to his social security number. 3, 2, 1. Executed. I watched the screen of my laptop. A cascade of command lines scrolled past in rapid white text against a black background. It was a digital slaughter. In less than 10 seconds, the vast reserves of cash Graham used to buy sports cars and ridicule his mother were frozen solid. "Now for the corporate access," I said, my voice steady. "Trigger the morality clause." Section 12, paragraph 4. Arthur recited. "Gross misconduct and misappropriation of funds. It gives the grantor, that is you, Marjorie, the right to immediate removal of the acting CEO without board approval. I am filing the electronic motion with the state and locking him out of the company mainframe. Now." I imagined the servers at the Hale Logistics headquarters 20 miles away, humming as they rewrote the hierarchy of power. Graham's keycard was being deactivated. His biometric data was being scrubbed from the executive elevator. His corporate email, which he used to mock his employees, was now inaccessible. "What about the liquidity?" I asked. "Moving it now," Arthur replied. I could hear the rapid clacking of his mechanical keyboard. "Transferring all liquid assets from the domestic holding accounts to the offshore trust in the Cayman Islands. It is under your maiden name. The money is flying out of New York faster than a jet plane. By the time the banks open at 9 in the morning, the Hale accounts will show a balance of $0 and 0 cents. "Good," I whispered. "Leave them nothing but the debt." I closed the laptop. The fan whirred into silence. I slipped the computer into my battered leather satchel. I did not need clothes. I did not need jewelry. I looked around the attic that had been my prison. I walked over to the small, dusty shelf and picked up a small cedar box. Inside was my late husband's wedding ring and a photo of us from 40 years ago, back when we were just two dreamers with one truck and a lot of hope. I placed the box in my bag. That was the only thing of value in this house. I turned to the bed. The sheets were rumpled from where I had sat waiting for Graham to fall asleep. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled savings bond. The paper was wrinkled where Graham had thrown it, but the value was still there. $100. I smoothed it out and placed it squarely in the center of the pillow. It was a cruel gift, perhaps, but it was the only inheritance they would ever receive from me. I stood by the door for a moment. 20 years. For 20 years. I had played the part of the grieving, helpless widow. I had let them treat me like furniture. I had let them think they were the masters of the universe while they spent money they did not earn. I had watched the rot spread in my son's soul, hoping he would change, hoping he would show just 1 ounce of the man his father wanted him to be. But tonight, the waiting was over. I opened the door. The hallway was dark and silent. I crept down the grand staircase, my hand trailing over the mahogany banister I had paid for 3 decades ago. The house was still. Graham and Lucinda were sleeping soundly in the master suite, dreaming of their wealth, unaware that they were already bankrupt. I reached the front foyer. The heavy oak door loomed before me. I unlocked it with a soft click and stepped out into the humid night air. The driveway was illuminated by the soft glow of security lights. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the gatehouse. It was Miller, the night security guard. He was a large man, an ex-Marine I had hired myself 15 years ago when his wife got sick and he needed insurance. Graham had tried to fire him twice to save money, and twice I had secretly intervened to keep his paycheck coming from my private reserves. Miller looked at the bag on my shoulder. He looked at the determined set of my jaw. He did not ask where I was going. He did not reach for his radio. "Mrs. Hale," he said quietly, touching the brim of his cap. "Good night, Miller," I replied. He pressed the button to open the heavy iron gates. As the metal swung open, creating a path to the main road, he gave me a single, slow nod. It was a salute. He knew exactly what was happening, and he was letting me go. I walked through the gates and into the darkness. I did not look back at the mansion. I did not look back at my son. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, walking toward the future I had reclaimed. The escape was complete. Now, the war would truly begin. The sun rose over the Hale estate with the same arrogant brilliance it displayed every morning. But for my son, the darkness was just beginning. From my vantage point in a roadside diner 50 miles north, I imagined Graham's routine perfectly. He would be waking up right now, stretching his limbs in silk sheets, his mind already fixated on the dealership in Providence. He had been talking about the new Maserati for weeks. He intended to wire a down payment of $50,000 before he even brushed his teeth. I took a slow sip of black coffee and checked the tablet resting on the Formica table. I still had remote access to the house security system. It was the one luxury I allowed myself the ability to watch the collapse. On the screen, I saw Graham sitting on the edge of his bed, his phone in his hand. He was tapping the screen furiously. I knew exactly what he was seeing. The banking app would have loaded, the little circle spinning for a moment before delivering the verdict. Total available balance, $0.00. He likely thought it was a glitch. He would be closing the app and reopening it, sweating slightly. Then, The second domino fell. In the video feed? Lucinda burst into the room. She was wearing a silk robe and clutching her platinum credit card like a weapon. I could not hear them, but I could read the panic in her body language. She was trying to book first-class tickets to St. Bart's for the weekend. The airline website would have flashed a big, red declined. Suddenly, the lights in the bedroom flickered and died. The smart home system, which controlled everything from the climate to the pool filtration, went offline. I had instructed Arthur to cancel the autopay for the utilities effective immediately. The electric company, tired of late payments that used to be covered by my personal infusion of cash, had wasted no time in cutting the service. Outside, the infinity pool pumps ground to a halt. The crystal blue water would be stagnant by noon. Graham and Lucinda were shouting at each other now. I watched them storm out of the master suite. They were heading for the attic. They needed someone to blame, and I was their favorite scapegoat. They kicked the door open. I saw them freeze. The room was stripped bare. The heavy box of winter blankets was gone. My clothes were gone. The only thing left was the bare mattress and the note I had left on the pillow. Graham snatched up the paper. I knew the words by heart. I have only taken back what belongs to me. He crumbled the note in his fist. He threw it against the wall and screamed. It was a silent scream on my tablet, but I could feel the vibration of it in my bones. Realization was crashing down on them. I was not lost. I was not wandering the streets confused. I had left. Graham pulled out his phone again. He was dialing Arthur. I had expected this. I switched the tablet view to the audio log, syncing it with the recording Arthur was undoubtedly making. Arthur. Graham's voice crackled through the speakers, high-pitched and hysterical. There is a glitch. The accounts are empty. The power is out. And my mother is gone. Fix it. Fix it right now. Mr. Hale. Arthur's voice was calm, professional, and colder than a New England winter. There is no glitch. The grantor has exercised her right to revoke the trust. The assets have been reclaimed. Reclaimed? Graham choked out. What are you talking about? That is my money. I am the CEO. You were the acting trustee. Arthur corrected him. And as of 8 this morning, you have been removed from your position at Hale Logistics for gross violation of the morality clause. Security has been notified to bar your entry to the building. You can't do this. Lucinda was screaming in the background now. We will sue you. We will sue her. You are welcome to try, Arthur said. But seeing as your retainers have bounced and your credit cards are frozen, I doubt you will find a lawyer willing to take the case. I am only following the terms of the founder. Mr. Hale. Good luck. The line went dead. Graham dropped the phone. He looked at Lucinda, and for the first time, I saw genuine terror in his eyes. The Maserati was gone. The trip to St. Bart's was gone. The illusion of power they had wrapped themselves in had evaporated, leaving them naked and shivering in a house they could no longer afford to heat. I closed the tablet cover. The waitress came by with a pot of coffee. Top you off, Hon? She asked. Yes, please, I said, smiling at her. It is a beautiful morning, isn't it? Sure is, she replied. I looked out the window at the highway stretching out before me. The air in the diner smelled of bacon and freedom. I had escaped. But as I thought of the fear on Graham's face, I knew the work was not done. This was just the demolition. Now, I had to make sure they could never rebuild on my foundation again. Graham drove his car to the glass-fronted headquarters of Hale Logistics on fumes, parking diagonally across two executive spaces. He marched toward the main entrance, adjusting his tie with shaking hands, trying to summon the arrogance that had carried him through life for 40 years. He slapped his access card against the reader. The light flashed red. He tried again. Red. "Open the door!" Graham shouted, slamming his palm against the glass. Inside, Brenda, the receptionist he had once fired and rehired just to humiliate her, looked up. She did not buzz him in. She simply picked up the phone and dialed security. Graham forced the doors open when a junior analyst exited, shoving the young man aside. He stormed toward the elevator, but the lift refused to move for him. He took the stairs, sprinting up 4 flights to the boardroom, sweating through his custom shirt. He burst into the meeting room, his chest heaving. The entire board was seated. Arthur Bellamy sat at the head of the table, my chair. "What is the meaning of this?" Graham screamed, his voice cracking. "Why is my badge not working? Why are my accounts frozen?" Arthur stood up slowly. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Graham with the disinterest one might show a buzzing fly. "Please sit down, Graham," Arthur said calmly. "We are just wrapping up. I was reading the resolution for your immediate termination." "Termination?" Graham laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound. "You work for me. You all work for me. I am the CEO." "Not anymore," Arthur replied, sliding a folder across the mahogany table. "The grantor has invoked the morality clause. Specifically, the sections regarding embezzlement, abuse of power, and conduct unbecoming of a Hale. You are out, effective immediately." Graham stared at the board members. These were men and women he had bullied, ignored, and belittled for years. Not one of them looked him in the eye. They looked at their papers, their phones, anywhere but at the man dissolving before them. This is insane," Graham stammered, backing away. "My mother. She is behind this. Isn't she that senile old witch? She can't do this." "She already did," Arthur said. Graham snapped. With a roar of pure, impotent rage, he lunged across the table. "I will kill you. You stole my life." He never reached Arthur. 2 security guards, men Graham had likely threatened to fire a dozen times, tackled him mid-air. They slammed him onto the plush carpet. One of them twisted Graham's arm behind his back with a little more force than was strictly necessary. "Get off me!" Graham shrieked, his face pressed into the floor. "I am Graham Hale. I own this building." "You are trespassing," the guard said, "and you are under arrest for assault." They dragged him out of the building. The lobby was lined with employees holding up their smartphones. I watched the footage later. Graham looked deranged, his shirt torn, screaming profanities as he was shoved into the back of a police cruiser. The video had 10,000 views within the hour. Meanwhile, Lucinda was fighting her own battle. She sat in her car outside a private bank in downtown Providence, her hands trembling as she held her phone. For years, she had been siphoning money from the household accounts into a secret slush fund, her escape plan in case Graham ever went broke. She thought she was clever. She thought I did not know about the skimming. She logged into her secret account. The balance stared back at her. 0. "No!" Lucinda whimpered, tapping the screen frantically. "No! No! No! That is my money. I stole that fair and square." A notification popped up on her screen. It was a forwarded message from Arthur. All assets derived from the Hale Trust, including those illicitly transferred to unauthorized accounts, have been repatriated. She screamed, slamming her fists against the steering wheel until the horn blared, echoing her desperation. By nightfall, the Maserati had been repossessed from the police impound lot. The mansion was locked tight. Graham was released on bail, paid for by pawning Lucinda's diamond earrings, the only jewelry she had been wearing when she fled. They ended up at the Starlight Motel on the edge of town, a place where the neon sign buzzed and the sheets smelled of stale cigarette smoke. I sat in my quiet rental cottage 50 miles away, watching the news report on the television. The headline read, "The Fall of the House of Hale." My phone buzzed. It was a text from Arthur Phase 1 complete. "They are desperate." I looked at the screen, at the pixelated image of my son hiding his face from the cameras. I felt a pang of sorrow, sharp and deep, for the boy he used to be. But then I remembered the bruising on my granddaughter's arm. I remembered the coldness in his eyes when he threw my bond on the floor. "We are not done, Arthur," I whispered to the empty room. "This was just the demolition. Now comes the excavation." I underestimated the depth of their depravity. I thought poverty would humble my son. But instead, it stripped away his last layer of humanity. Graham did not spend his first day of ruin looking for employment. He spent it looking for a weapon. He found one in the form of a disgraced private investigator named Russo, a man who operated out of a basement office in Providence and asked no questions as long as the cash was green. Graham paid him with the last $2,000 Lucinda had managed to hide in her vanity case before the accounts froze. I learned later that it was Lucinda who devised the strategy. They sat in that cramped, yellow-walled motel room, the air thick with their desperation, plotting their next move. "She does not care about us," Lucinda had reportedly said, picking at her chipped manicure. She never did. But she cares about the girl. That is her weakness. She is obsessed with that child. If we squeeze the little one, Marjorie will come running. They turned their own daughter into bait. The video appeared online at 4 in the afternoon. It spread through the local community groups like a virus before making the evening news. The headline was designed to destroy my credibility. Dementia-stricken matriarch abandons family, leaves son destitute. I sat in my safe house and watched the clip on my phone. The camera was shaky, clearly held by Graham. My 7-year-old granddaughter sat on the edge of the motel bed. Her hair was unbrushed, and her eyes were red and swollen. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please come home. Mommy says you are sick. She says you forgot who we are. We are scared. Grandma, we don't have any food. Please bring the money back. Please don't be mean anymore." The video cut to black. The comments section was already filling with vitriol against me. People called me a monster. They called me selfish. The police issued a silver alert, assuming I was wandering the streets in a state of confusion, a danger to myself and others. The narrative had shifted. I was no longer the victim. I was the villain, and my son was the suffering martyr trying to save his mentally ill mother. I felt a wave of nausea. I almost reached for the phone to call Arthur and surrender, just to stop the public humiliation of my family. But then, I watched the video again. I paused it at the 12-second mark. I zoomed in. When my granddaughter raised her arm to wipe her nose, the sleeve of her t-shirt slid up. There, stark against her pale skin, were 3 dark, purple bruises. They were oval-shaped. They were the exact size of an adult male's fingertips. The air in my room seemed to drop 20 degrees. I stared at the image until my eyes burned. That was not a bruise from a playground fall. That was a grip mark. Graham had squeezed her arm. He had hurt her to make her cry on cue. He had inflicted physical pain on his own child to secure a better camera take. I set the phone down on the table. My hands were perfectly steady. The grief I had felt for the loss of my family evaporated instantly. The pity I had harbored for my son's incompetence vanished. What replaced it was a cold, hard resolve that felt like iron settling in my chest. "You made a mistake, Graham," I said to the empty room. "You thought I was teaching you a lesson. You thought this was just about money." I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the panes. "You touched the child," I whispered. "And for that, I will bury you." I turned back to my laptop. The defensive phase was over. I was done hiding. I was done protecting the family name. It was time to initiate the total destruction of the enemy. I dialed the private number for the Chief of Staff at Whitehall Medical Center. I had donated $5 million to build their new neurology wing 10 years ago, and I knew my name still carried weight within those sterile walls. When the administrator answered, I did not ask for a favor. I demanded cooperation for a police sting operation. "Set the stage," I told Arthur 5 minutes later. "Leak it. Tell the detective I was found wandering near the highway, confused and hysterical. Tell them I am being held at Whitehall for a 72-hour psych evaluation and that I am currently sedated but lucid." "They will come running," Arthur said, his voice tight. "But Marjorie, this is dangerous. If they get to you before the police do—" "They will not get to me," I replied, smoothing the lapel of the charcoal Armani suit I had not worn since my last board meeting. "Because I will not be the one in the bed." The trap was baited. Within an hour, Graham's private investigator had intercepted the leak and relayed it to my son. I watched the security feed from a monitor in the nurses' station down the hall. Graham and Lucinda arrived at the hospital entrance with the frantic energy of sharks smelling blood in the water. Trailing behind them was a man I recognized from my background checks, Dr. Aris, a physician who had lost his license in 2 states and now made a living writing prescriptions for cash. He was clutching a black medical bag tight against his chest. They bypassed the reception desk entirely, marching toward the private suite Arthur had identified in the leak. They moved with an arrogant confidence, convinced that victory was finally within their grasp. They thought I was broken. They thought I was a confused old woman waiting to be exploited one last time. I watched them stop outside room 304. Graham looked at Lucinda, wiped sweat from his upper lip, and pushed the door open. Inside, the room was dimly lit. A figure sat in a wheelchair facing the window, their back to the door, huddled under a thick grey blanket. The person appeared frail and small, their head bowing as if in deep distress. "Mom." Graham's voice was a mixture of false concern and urgent greed. He stepped into the room, waving the doctor forward. "Mum, thank God we found you. You are sick. You are not thinking clearly." The figure in the chair did not move. Lucinda pulled a stack of legal documents from her oversized purse. "We are here to help. Marjorie, we just need you to sign these papers so we can take care of you. It transfers the trust back to Graham. It is for your own good." Still, the figure remained silent. "She is out of it," Graham snapped, his patience snapping. He turned to Dr. Aris. Give her the shot. Make her compliant. We need that signature now before the doctors come back. The dosage is high, the doctor muttered, his hands shaking as he prepared a syringe filled with a clear liquid. It might stop her heart if she is weak. Just do it, Lucinda hissed. We don't have time to argue. Give her the shot. Doctor. Aris stepped forward, raising the needle. He reached for the arm of the person in the chair. At that exact second, the figure threw off the blanket and spun the wheelchair around. It was not me. It was a female undercover officer, her hand already gripping the service weapon on her hip. Police! She shouted, the command echoing off the tiled walls. Drop the weapon. Drop it now. The door to the ensuite bathroom flew open, and 3 uniformed officers burst into the room, weapons drawn. Get on the ground. One of the officers roared. Dr. Aris dropped the syringe. It shattered on the floor. Graham stumbled back, his face draining of all colour, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. Lucinda shrieked and tried to shove the papers behind her back, as if hiding them would erase the intent. No, Graham stammered, raising his hands. This is a mistake. My mother, she is sick. We were helping her. I am perfectly healthy. Graham, I said. The sound of my voice cut through the chaos like a razor. I stepped out from the hallway shadows and entered the room. I was not wearing a hospital gown. I was dressed in my tailored suit, my hair pulled back, my posture straight and commanding. I looked at the son I had raised, the boy who had just ordered a stranger to drug me into submission. I walked past the officers until I was standing 2 feet away from him. He looked at me with horror, finally realizing the magnitude of his miscalculation. You, Graham whispered. You set us up. I did, I replied coldly. I gave you a choice, Graham. I walked away. I left you the house. I left you your freedom. But you had to come after me. You had to hurt my granddaughter. I looked at the shattered syringe on the floor, then back at his terrified eyes. And now, I said, you are going to learn what happens when you try to bury a woman who is still very much alive. Officer, please, you have to listen to me. Graham stammered, backing away until his spine hit the sterile white wall. He pointed a shaking finger at me. My mother is suffering from severe dementia. She is prone to hallucinations. She does not know what she is saying. This is all a misunderstanding. I did not blink. I reached into my suit pocket and pulled out my phone. I had synchronized it with the audio bugs Arthur had placed in their motel room just hours before. I tapped the screen and turned the volume up to the maximum. Graham's voice, tinny but unmistakable, filled the hospital room. We just need to give her enough to keep her quiet. Lucinda, if the dose is too high, well, she is old. People stop breathing all the time. If her heart stops, it stops. We get the money either way. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Graham's face turned the colour of ash. He looked at the officers, then at the doctor, and finally at me. That is doctored, he choked out, sweat dripping down his temple. That is AI. I never said that. We have the original recordings authenticated by a forensic audio specialist, the lead detective said, stepping forward. And we have the testimony of the private investigator you hired. He rolled on you the moment we brought him in for questioning. Lucinda let out a high-pitched whimper. She tried to edge toward the door, but I was not finished with her. And you? I said, turning my gaze to my daughter-in-law. You thought you could use my granddaughter as a pawn. I swiped the screen on my phone, casting the image to the large monitor on the wall that was meant for viewing X-rays. It was a video clip recovered from Lucinda's cloud storage. It showed her gripping the child's arm, her face twisted in a snarl. Cry louder. The Lucinda on the screen screamed. If you don't cry like your life depends on it, you are sleeping in the bathtub tonight. Do you want me to pinch you again? Lucinda saw the video and her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the linoleum floor, sobbing into her hands. It was not the cry of a remorseful mother. It was the wail of a narcissist who had lost her audience. Get them up, the detective ordered. 2 officers grabbed Dr. Aris first. He did not fight. He slumped forward, defeated, as the metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. He knew his medical career was over. Then they moved for Graham. No, wait, Graham yelled. At that moment, a female officer appeared in the doorway, holding the hand of my granddaughter. They had brought her to the station for safety, but she must have insisted on seeing me. Graham saw her. For a split second, I saw a flash of calculation in his eyes. He lunged toward the door, his hands outstretched, trying to grab the girl, perhaps to use her as a shield or a bargaining chip. Come here, he shouted. Come to Daddy. My granddaughter recoiled. She did not look at him with love. She looked at him with pure terror. She ripped her hand away from the officer and sprinted across the room. She did not run to her mother. She did not run to her father. She ran straight to me, burying her face in the fabric of my suit jacket. I wrapped my arms around her, shielding her from the monsters who had given her life. Get him! The detective roared. 3 officers slammed Graham against the wall. He struggled, kicking and screaming, but they pinned him down and wrenched his arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratchet locking was the loudest sound in the room. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, extortion, and aggravated child abuse, the detective recited, his voice devoid of sympathy. They hauled Graham to his feet. He looked pathetic, his expensive shirt torn, his hair wild. He looked at me, and for the first time, the arrogance was completely gone. He was just a scared little boy again. Mum, he cried out, tears streaming down his face. Mum, please don't let them take me. I am your son. You can't do this. I am sorry. I will be better. I looked at him. I searched my heart for that familiar tug of maternal forgiveness, the instinct that had made me bail him out of trouble for 40 years. I searched for the love that had blinded me to his cruelty. I found nothing. The man standing before me was not my son. My son had died a long time ago, consumed by the greed of the stranger in handcuffs. I am not doing this to you, Graham, I said, my voice steady and final. You did this. You chose the money over your family. You chose cruelty over kindness. I stroked my granddaughter's hair as she trembled against me. You did not lose everything because of me, I told him, looking him dead in the eye. You lost everything because of you. I nodded to the officers. Take them away. The emergency hearing took place less than 24 hours after the arrests. The courtroom was small and smelled of lemon polish and stale anxiety. Because of the severity of the charges, conspiracy to commit murder and aggravated child abuse, the judge had granted an immediate session to determine the temporary custody of my granddaughter. Graham stood at the defense table. He had traded his torn shirt for a fresh suit brought by his lawyer. but he could not hide the tremors in his hands. When the judge asked for his statement, Graham pointed a shaking finger at me. "Your Honor, this is a witch hunt," Graham said, his voice rising in pitch. "My mother is 70 years old. She is paranoid. She has been hallucinating enemies for years. I was not trying to hurt her. I was trying to get her the medical help she refuses to take. She is unfit to care for a child. She thinks she is running a spy operation." I sat in the gallery, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I did not speak. I let Arthur Bellamy do the talking. Arthur stood up. He looked like a monolith in his navy suit. He walked to the bench and placed a thick stack of files before the judge. "Your Honor," Arthur said, his voice deep and resonating. "The defense claims his client was acting out of concern. We have bank records here showing that Mr. Hale embezzled over $4 million from the Hale Family Trust in the last 5 years. We have evidence of wire fraud. And, most damning of all, we have this." Arthur plugged a USB drive into the court's AV system. The video from the hotel room played on the large screens. The audio was crisp. The entire courtroom listened to Graham's voice discussing the dosage of sedatives required to stop my heart. "It is just a little heart failure. Nobody investigates an old woman dying in her sleep." A gasp went through the room. The judge's face turned into a mask of stone. She looked at Graham with an expression of pure disgust. "Mr. Hale," the judge said, her voice icy, "you are discussing matricide." I was joking," Graham stammered, sweat pouring down his face. It was dark humor. Stress relief. Lucinda, sitting beside him, realized the ship was sinking. She suddenly stood up, shoving Graham away from her. "It was him," Lucinda shrieked. "Your Honor, I was terrified of him. He forced me to go along with it. He said he would hurt me if I didn't help him get the money. I am a victim here. I am a good mother." Arthur did not even look at her. He simply clicked a button on the remote. The screen changed. The video of Lucinda pinching my granddaughter and screaming at her to cry for the camera began to play. The sound of the child's whimpering filled the silent courtroom. "Sit down, Mrs. Hale," the judge ordered, banging her gavel. "I have seen enough." The ruling was swift and brutal. The judge looked at both of them over her spectacles. "I am terminating your parental rights, effective immediately pending the criminal trial," she declared. "You are remanded to custody without bail. The child will remain under the sole guardianship of Marjorie Hale." "You can't do this!" Graham screamed, lunging against the bailiffs who were moving to handcuff him again. "I am her son. I am a Hale. That is my blood. You cannot take my daughter from me. I am the only heir." I stood up then. The room went quiet. I walked to the railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. I looked at the man I had fed, clothed, and protected for 40 years. "Arthur," I said softly, "give him the envelope." Arthur handed a sealed document to Graham. Graham ripped it open with his cuffed hands. He scanned the paper, and his eyes went wide. He stopped breathing. What is this?" Graham whispered. "It is a DNA test," I said, my voice echoing in the hush. "Comparison between your genetic markers and mine, 0% match." Graham shook his head. "That is impossible. I am your son." "No," I said. "You are the son of my late husband and his secretary. She died in childbirth. My husband begged me to take you. He begged me to raise you as my own and never tell you the truth to spare you the shame of being illegitimate. I took a step closer. I made a promise to a dying man that I would love you and protect you, I said. I kept that promise for 40 years. I gave you my name. I gave you my fortune. I gave you my heart. But the moment you plotted to kill me, the moment you hurt that little girl, you broke the contract. Graham stared at me, his mouth open, his entire identity shattering into dust. He was not the heir to an empire. He was the result of a betrayal I had graciously covered up for decades. I am not your mother, Graham, I said, turning my back on him. And you are no longer my son. The trial ended not with a bang, but with the heavy, final thud of a cell door closing. Graham and Lucinda were denied bail. The charges were too severe, and the flight risk was too high. They are now looking at 15 to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. I did not visit them. There was nothing left to say. The boy I raised had been consumed by the monster he became, and I had to accept that he was gone long before the handcuffs clicked shut. The judge granted me full and permanent custody of my granddaughter. As we walked out of the courthouse, holding hands, I knew we could not stay in Newport. The air there was too cold, and the memories were too sharp. The mansion was just a mausoleum of failed dreams. Grandma, she asked me as we buckled into the car. Where are we going? Somewhere warm, I promised her. Somewhere the shadows cannot find us. We moved 3 weeks later to St. Augustine, Florida. I had purchased a small, weathered cottage near the beach almost 10 years ago, hidden under a generic limited liability company, for a retirement I thought I would never get to enjoy. It is not a mansion. It has creaky floorboards and a porch that smells of salt spray and jasmine. But to us, it is a palace. Our mornings are different now. There are no silent breakfasts at long dining tables. We eat pancakes on the back patio while watching the seagulls dive for fish. The colour has returned to my granddaughter's cheeks. She takes piano lessons from a nice retired teacher down the street, and for the first time in years, the sound of music in the house is not a performance for guests, but a genuine expression of joy. Yesterday, I found her in her room with a hammer and a small nail. She was hanging a picture frame on the wall above her bed. Inside the frame was not a photo of her parents, nor a certificate from school. It was the crumpled, slightly stained savings bond worth $100. Why that, I asked, leaning against the doorframe. She looked at me, her eyes clear and wise beyond her 7 years. Because, she said softly, this is when you saved me. It reminds me that you were brave, so I could be safe. I had to look away to hide the tears. Arthur Bellamy came to visit us this weekend. He looked out of place in the Florida heat in his crisp linen suit. But he was smiling. We sat on the porch drinking iced tea. It is done. Marjorie, Arthur said, setting his glass down. The liquidation is complete. The trust is restructured solely for the girl's education and future. The Newport estate is sold. You are completely free. No more board meetings. No more battles. Thank you, Arthur, I said, for everything. That evening, I walked down to the water's edge alone. The Atlantic Ocean stretched out before me, vast and indifferent. I thought about Graham. I thought about the pain of severing that bond, the unnatural agony of a mother testifying against her child. It still hurt. It would always hurt. But then I looked back at the cottage. I saw the warm yellow light spilling from my granddaughter's window. I heard the faint melody of her practicing a scale on the piano. I realized then that I had made the only choice possible. I looked at the waves crashing against the sand and whispered into the wind. Sometimes, I said to the ghost of the husband who had left me this burden, to save the sapling that is trying to grow toward the light, you have to chop down the tree that has rotted from the inside out. I turned my back on the ocean and walked toward the light of the house. I was finally home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know where you are tuning in from and what you would have done in my shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people. Your support means the world to me